Today I'm taking a look at the Aston Spirit, a multi-pattern true condenser microphone that's used by professional artists and engineers, but offered at an accessible price point for home and project studios. Now I'll be sharing unprocessed audio for voice, electric, and bass guitar, as well as percussion instruments, so I recommend you wear a good set of headphones so you get the most out of the review. Now, up until now, you've been listening to me on the Spirit without any processing. Keep an eye on the lower thirds because we will try this with another preamp, plugins, and some analog hardware. Now, right now I'm about 4 inches off the microphone here. I have it slightly off axis just to make sure I'm not getting any plosives into the microphone for you. Because. It actually does a pretty good job. It has a built-in pop filter, but you can use the Aston pop filter. It comes in a kit with a shock mount as well. Here I have it, of course, just directly into my boom arm, but you do have some options there. Now, this microphone also has a number of controls that are built in here. We have polar pattern, we have bass roll-off, and we also have a pad control. Right now I'm in the cardioid polar pattern. I'll switch it over to Omni and let you hear that. And this is now the omnidirectional polar pattern, so we're not going to get any proximity effect. As I move in and out, it's not going to have an issue as far as that's concerned, but it is going to pick up a lot more of the room noise. And I do have the fans on my computer that are pretty noisy right now. It's kind of warm in the room, so we are picking that up. I can certainly hear it in my monitoring. Now I'm going to switch over to figure 8. And this is the figure 8 polar pattern. Basically picks up in front of the microphone and behind the microphone. Really useful for various type of miking techniques and also can just give you a different tone. So options here galore on the mic, lots to choose from. I'll go back to cardioid. And so back at cardioid, which is the most typical pattern used for vocals. Now we'll also try the bass roll-off or high pass filter. It's an 80 Hz switch. And here we are now with that high pass filter at 80 Hz. It's going to roll off any low rumble, anything in kind of the background that the mic may be picking up. You can tell if it's making any changes in the tone of my voice. 80 Hz is pretty low. Usually you don't get too much vocal information below there, but of course it just depends on the user. Now when I think about working distance with a condenser microphone, I think that I have a lot of room. So again, I've been at 4 inches off the mic. I'll move back a little bit. And so now I'm about a foot away from the microphone, and you can hear it'll start to pick up a little more of the room. I'm still seeing a very healthy signal coming through, so it has dropped a little bit, but not excessive. Very usable at this point. Back up a little further. Now I'm at about 2 feet off the microphone, so at 2 feet away, again, I'm seeing it's dropped off a bit, but I'm still getting plenty of signal here. Now, while I'm at this distance, I also want to talk about this for percussion instruments. And I have a shaker here, and I want you to listen for the fine detail at this distance. And to my monitoring, that picks up a lot of detail. This microphone is known to be a very clear, articulate mic, and I certainly heard it in my monitoring. Now, I have the Cabasa here as well for a little bit of percussion sound. And the microphone looks very sensitive to that, picking it up really well. For the first microphone comparison, I wanted to give you an affordable option here that I still think can produce good recordings. So we have the Spirit versus the Audio-Technica AT2020. Now it is a bit of an unfair comparison. We have a 1-inch true large diaphragm condenser capsule on the one side, whereas the AT2020 is a 5/8 or 16 millimeter capsule. So capsule isn't everything, but it does give the Spirit an advantage here. Now the AT2020 is a cardioid pickup pattern microphone, doesn't really have any adjustment for that, whereas the Spirit, of course, is multi-pattern, so I have it in the cardioid mode. And of course, you're listening to me as I switch back and forth between the two. And now that you've heard me on both microphones, can you tell the difference? Is this the Audio-Technica AT2020 or the Aston Spirit? Check that top corner to find out. Now for the second comparison, I have the Spirit and I have the Aston Origin here. Now both of these microphones use a 1-inch capsule, so a little more even of a match, but the Spirit, of course, has a transformer in the circuit, so that's going to give us some different audio characteristics. Now when we look at these, this is a cardioid pickup pattern on the Origin, so again I have the Spirit set in the cardioid mode. Both of these microphones can be very popular for vocals, for acoustic guitar, recording wind instruments, a lot of choices really here. So it comes down to whether you need the flexibility, but also the tone is different between the two mics. And now that you've heard both microphones, can you tell the difference? Is this the Spirit or is this the Origin? Check the top corner to find out. Now for the final comparison, I have the Spirit versus the Warm Audio WA47 Junior. Now the 47 Junior features a K47 capsule. It's 34 millimeter diameter, so considerably larger than the capsule now in the Spirit. The other thing that differs between these two microphones is the Spirit used as a transformer in the circuit, whereas the 47 Junior is a FET microphone without a transformer. So a little bit of a difference again in the circuitry. It's going to change the type of sound we get out of the two microphones. And for one last time, now that you've heard both microphones, can you tell the difference? Is this the Aston Spirit or is this the Warm Audio WA47 Junior? Check that top corner to find out. Now for the preamp test with this microphone, I've gone ahead and connected it up to the Universal Audio 710 to infinity. And as some of you may know, this preamp has two circuit paths, one solid state and one tube. So we're going to get a bit of saturation when we start to introduce that. Of course, still no processing on the mic. So starting out here, we have solid state 100%. Now as I dial it up, now I've got about 25% tube, 75% solid state. So I'm starting to introduce some saturation from the tube circuit. Now I move it up to about 50-50. So here again, 50% solid state, 50% tube. We're starting to hear more saturation. I can certainly hear it coming in my monitoring. Moving it up to about 75%, starting to really get some of that character built in. And it's not something we might expect with this microphone. It tends to have a fairly modern sound, but sometimes you may want a little more saturation. And finally up to 100% tube. This is a full tube circuit path, so if you're using a tube preamplifier, this will give you an idea of some of the characteristics this microphone will gain. Now, listening back to the two recordings, I can tell you that there's a lot of things that are very similar about them, but I did find the Spirit had a little more detail to my ears, maybe a little more open sound, and in fact, maybe a little bit more like what it actually sounds like in the space. Now, again, when you look at the frequency response comparison, very similar between the two, but if you really focus in on specifics, especially in the high frequencies, you'll see some minute detail in the pickup from the Spirit that isn't there in the 57. Now, of course, I use the SM57 as a familiar point of reference for all of us. We've all heard that microphone on guitar and bass cabinets before. So it's interesting. The Spirit, I'm going to say again, it lives up to the reputation as being detailed and articulate. Let's check out blues guitar. And listening back to the clean blues guitar recordings, again, I can hear a detail and a presence from the Spirit that isn't there with the 57. The 57 sounds a little more flat, a little more like it's in a really dead room. And of course, we expect a condenser microphone to pick up a little more room sound. But again, I'm going to say the recordings on the blues guitar with the Spirit seemed a little bit more like what it sounded like in the room to my ears. Now, when we look at the frequency response, again, a lot of similarity between these two microphones. And overall, you certainly could use either one very easily. But you will notice, again, if you really look at the fine detail of the frequency response curve for the Spirit, there are some specifics, some detail, again, some crisp, articulate sound that the Spirit is picking up. Now, listening back to the recordings of the bass guitar amp, I can say that the transformer circuitry in the Spirit became apparent to my ears. There was a certain rounding off and smoothness to the low frequencies without losing any of the articulation in the upper frequencies. Again, looking at the frequency comparison, they're very similar between the two microphones here. Some additional detail captured by the Spirit, but again, the Spirit sounded a little more like the room. The 57 sounded a little more like an ISO cab to me. Either one very usable, depends on the sound you're trying to get. And so when I consider the guitar and bass amp recordings of the Spirit versus the SM57, I'm not declaring either one a winner here. What I'm going to say is that I found the Spirit to be a little more open and articulate, certainly picked up more of the room sound. The 57 sounded a little bit tighter, a little more like an ISO cab. Both of them are very, very good. Either way, it just depends on the tone that you're looking for. Now, my approach to applying processing for voiceover is fairly straightforward with this microphone. I like to just balance out the tones while taming the sibilance to some extent. And my voice does tend to have quite a bit of sibilance, so this microphone does really pick that up. Now we have an EQ, compression, and de-esser here. That's a fairly standard vocal chain. For those that like to use analog, we'll try some hardware. Now for the analog test, I've went ahead and connected the Spirit up again to the Universal Audio 710 to infinity. This time I have the tube saturation up to about 20%, so 80% solid state circuit, 20% tube. We're using the ART voice channel for EQ, compression, de-essing, and expansion, so a fairly typical vocal chain in the analog domain. I've gone ahead and thickened up the low end just a little bit to get it balanced, and then added a little presence just to give a little more clarity. And there's many ways you can do this, but this will give you an idea. Now, I would have to say that the build quality of this microphone is excellent in this price point and even much higher. You have a 2mm stainless steel body here that's been laser cut and etched, so very solid. This basket around the capsule, it'll deform if you drop it, but you can push it back into place. Everything here is really solid. Now, when I talk about the switches, one thing I will say is they are mounted to the circuitry inside, not to the chassis itself from what I can tell. So there is a little bit of play in them, but I haven't noticed any issue with them, being sloppy or not working. There is a positive click side to side. XLR connection is also very solid, so I have to say I would expect this microphone is going to last a long time. Now I'll have a link for full specifications in the description below, but suffice to say this microphone has a frequency response of 20 to 20,000 Hertz with 3 available polar patterns, cardioid, omni, and figure of 8. So a very flexible microphone that can be used to record a variety of sources. My overall impression of the Spirit is that it is both a very clear and articulate sounding microphone. It leans towards a modern sound, not to say that it's sterile. It does have a transformer, a nice warm rounded off bass, but overall the clarity is great here, which is one of the reasons why it's so useful on so many different sources. Now all the functions on this microphone, everything works very well. The polar patterns, the pad switch, the bass roll off, everything is as I would expect, again, in this price point and higher. So I would have to say that if you're looking for a microphone that can get a lot done for you in your home studio or professional studio, this is definitely one you want to look at. There's a lot of value here. And if you're interested in other options for condenser microphones, check out one of these videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.